Welcome to Sweet Bakery. I'm Stacey Farrant, and as long as I can remember, I have enjoyed making cakes, whether it was in my Easy Bake Oven, making little tiny ones, or in my own bakery, making beautiful cakes for everyone to enjoy for all of their special celebrations. One of the biggest questions that I get asked all the time is, how do you decorate a cake? It seems simple to me, but it doesn't always seem simple to everyone else. And I have a very classic style, and I'm a little bit of a lazy baker, so I don't actually like to do anything complicated, but I think I make it look harder than it is, kind of like making Rice Krispie squares. So today what we're going to do is we're going to do Cake Decorating 101. So we're going to work with the perfect classic buttercream, and I'm going to take you through the very simple steps of decorating a cake, from a very simple, smooth icing technique right through to you can master a rosette by the time we're done today. So to get started, we definitely have to start with making our buttercream, because without a really good frosting, the cake is just not going to be the same. So whether you're using a boxed cake or you're a little more accomplished home baker and you want to make something from scratch, this simple frosting can be applied to any kind of cake that you're making, and can be adapted to different flavors to complement the type of cake that you are enjoying for your dessert or for your occasion. So for me, nothing says home baking like starting with a good pound of butter. So I always start my buttercream with a nice pound of butter. You want to either bring it to room temperature if you have time to do that. It does take several hours. If you don't have time, or you're kind of baking at the last minute, you can certainly microwave it. You just want to make sure that you're microwaving it in simple increments so that you're not melting it. You don't want to work with a melted butter, you just want to work with a softened butter. So I have my lovely KitchenAid mixed master, but if you don't have a KitchenAid, or you don't have a stand mixer, you can certainly make your frosting with a handheld mixer. You can even make it in a bowl with a whisk. It's just whatever tools you have. I would say start small. If you're just a new baker, don't go out and spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars and buy all the best equipment and realize you really hate baking and you'd rather call the bakery. So I'm just going to put my pound of butter into my mixer, and then besides using butter, the next really important key to making really good frosting is how much you whip this. And I just want to make sure I'm not going to wear this when I'm done. So once you have your butter in your mixer, you want to start a little bit slow, because you don't want to be wearing it. It's going to be soft. So what you want to do is you want to get it really fluffy. So the butter is going to be almost a yellow color when you put it in there, and the more you whip it, the lighter it's going to become in color and in texture. It takes a few minutes, so this is the part where you have to be a little bit patient while you're making it, and just bring it to a little higher speed. You can even stop it for a second and introduce your vanilla. Now, at my shop and in my kitchen, I always like to use pure vanilla. It just has a nicer flavor. So you can either use pure vanilla extract. You can also use a vanilla bean if you want to scrape the seeds. That's a little more effort if you're up to it. Or you can also buy a vanilla bean paste. Now, pure vanilla, because it's in a brown color, it's definitely going to color your frosting a little more. You're never going to achieve that white frosting with a butter-based frosting, but it's always going to taste better. It's going to be so much more levels of flavor. If you do want a whiter look to it, you can buy a really good quality clear vanilla, but definitely my suggestion is to use pure vanilla. So I would say for about a pound of butter, which will ice a 2-layer cake, use about 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And again, I'm going to just turn this on slow. I'm going to get this really nice and whippy. So I'm going to be doing an 8-inch cake today, and I'm making just a single batch of frosting, but you can certainly double this if you're making a larger cake or triple it. Icing does freeze as well, so if you make a little too much, you can keep it in the fridge airtight for a week or so if you want, and just bring it out to room temperature, a couple hours ahead before you're going to need it. Or you can even, again, microwave it in small increments just to soften it, not to melt it. And definitely you can freeze it as well. So we're getting a really nice whippy texture, and the butter is lightening, and it's just turning quite beautiful. So I'm going to turn this off, and then what we're going to do is we're going to slowly incorporate our icing sugar. So for every 1 pound of butter, you're going to need about 5 dry cups of icing sugar or powdered sugar, depending on how you call it. So I'm going to put in, probably about half of this, and then I'm going to start whisking it again. So if you're buying icing sugar in 1 kilogram bags, which is kind of how they sell it in the grocery store, I buy it in ginormous bags, then it's about 1 whole bag. And of course, I'm going to make a mess. That's one thing I've not been able to master over the years, is not have a little bit of sugar all over the place. I'm going to pour a little bit of room temperature or even warm milk in here, just enough. There's no real measurement, but just enough to help kind of make this nice and creamy. And we're going to just let the mixer do its work. And we're going to scrape down the side of the bowl just a little bit in between, because you want to make sure that everything gets nice and mixed in so that you don't have a granular texture to your frosting. So I'm going to lift that back up. It's a little bit of a process. If you're impatient, just dump it all in, but you'll probably have a little bit more all over your counter when you're done, kind of like what I've got. And as far as the milk goes, you just want enough, because you want your frosting to always have a really nice, creamy consistency. And people don't realize that the temperature in your house plays a big role on how any of your baking turns out, even making frosting. Because if your house is too cool in the summertime because you have the air on, or too cool in the wintertime because you haven't turned your heat up far enough, it will stiffen as it's being made or while you're using it. And the last thing you want is a really stiff frosting, because it's just not going to spread as nicely on your cake. It's not going to have as nice of a creamy texture when you're eating it. So you do want it nice and creamy. So I'm just going to add a little bit more milk here, and then I am just going to whip this thing really good. And then when we're all done, it's just going to be so nice. There we go. It's looking good. It's amazing how the frosting just goes from this really kind of pale yellow to a soft, creamy color, and it just looks so yummy. There's nothing, just more desirable than sticking your finger in this bowl and wanting to have a little bit of icing before it even makes it to the cake. So this looks really nice. I'm really happy with it. But then again, who wouldn't be happy with a nice big buttery bowl of frosting? I'm going to hold it up just so you guys can see what it looks like. So you can see it's got that really nice pale color, but a really creamy texture. So I'll just scoop it a little bit just so you can see. I could probably even add just a little bit more milk to this, but I'm a trained professional, so I'm sure I can work with this while we're icing the cake. So now that we've made our frosting, I'm just going to get this out of the way. And we have a few tools here that are really important when we're decorating a cake. We definitely don't need to go out to our local baking supply store or craft store and buy everything, you know, especially when you're just starting out and you're not sure again if this is what you want to do or if you really enjoy it or you think this is your forte. So there's a couple of things that you want to buy. One are good quality baking pans. You want to make sure that they're nice and heavy. Light pans are always going to bake nicer. It's kind of like wearing, you know, white on a summer day as opposed to wearing black. Black is dark pans are going to attract to the heat more, so light pans are going to give your cakes a nicer color, a nicer texture. That's why, you know, you get those awful no-stick cookie sheets and they always burn your cookies. It's because they're dark in color, so they just attract the heat. So you want to buy good quality light colored pans. You'll thank me for that little bit of advice in the future. And then of course for icing a cake you want to have a spatula. I have this one that I've had for about 25 years and everyone knows to spread out and form a search party if I can't find it because it's my favorite. It just handles really well in my hands for when I want to ice my cake, but I've bought a few others just in case I ever lose this one. So you just want to make sure it fits nicely in your hand. It's got a little bit of an angle which really helps you to get around your cakes just that little bit better. So everybody likes to, it's like holding cutlery. Some people like a more weighted spoon or fork or knife. So just whatever feels comfortable in your hand and you can work with, because it's a little awkward when you get started icing a cake. Some people like a larger spatula, which is definitely great for getting around the cakes. I find this a little awkward myself unless I'm doing a large cake, but to each their own. So we're going to use a cake plate today. Of course, you know, in the bakery we're usually using, you know, the little cake boards. But we've lined our cake pans with a little bit of parchment paper. That way they just easily pop right out. And then as you can see, this cake has a little bit of a dome to it, which if you're just doing a single layer cake and it's just for your family or you want a little more rustic look, by all means, leave the dome on it. But because we're going to do a 2-layer cake today, we're going to want to level this out or else you're going to end up with a little bit of icing in the center and a lot of icing around the sides. And you know, for those of you who like icing, that's really nice, but it's definitely not a desired look when you cut into the cake. You end up getting kind of angular looking slices, and that's not what we want. So I just take a nice good quality sharp serrated knife and you're just gonna level it. You don't want to take too much cake off because that would be a shame to waste, but you know, my kids used to always call this the bubble in our house, and they used to wait for the bubble and we'd spread a little extra icing on the top of it and the kids would divvy it up. So luckily with a 2-layer cake there was lots of bubble to go around with 3 kids. So we've got our cake, and don't worry about crumbs because that's the first thing that we're going to do. We're going to be crumb coating our cake. And the crumb coat is just exactly that. It is to eliminate the crumbs from being in the final product of your iced cake. So I'm just going to level off the second one. This is a really nice, dense, buttery homemade vanilla cake, which, you know, it's always nice to, homemade is always best, and anything that starts with butter is always yummy. So I'm just going to get a nice big dollop of our frosting. I'm going to use my trusty little spatula here. And as you can see, there's no real method to this except for the fact that you're pushing the icing to the edges, and you want to make sure you cover all of the edges. And it's okay if it hangs out a little bit, because anything that kind of comes out over the sides is what you're going to continue to use for your crumb coat. So then you want to, if you haven't cut it quite level enough, you're just going to want to make sure that when you're putting it on, you match the sides up so that when the cake does get stacked, it looks nice and level, because you don't want a topsy-turvy cake by any stretch. So then we just get a little bit more frosting, and we're just going to put that right on the top. And again, with your spatula, you're just going to push the frosting. We're going to start with the top, Don't be afraid. You know, that's the nice thing about this. It's the crumb coat, so this is the part that gets hidden. You're not going to have to worry too much about anybody seeing this unless you don't finish icing it. So you've pushed all of your icing out to the edges. Then you're just going to work with that little bit of icing that's starting to hang down, and you're just going to push it, and you're just going to slowly try and stay tight to the cake, and you're going to push it around. And this is our crumb coat. This is holding in all those little loose bits and crumbs of cake that have escaped while we've been cutting it and taking it out from the pan. And then once we've finished crumb coating, we're just going to pop it into the fridge just for a few minutes. It doesn't take long for this thin layer of icing to set, and then we are ready to put the final coat of icing on our cake. Now, one thing that you do not want to do with your cake when you're putting it into the fridge is leave it in there too long. Unless it's a very, very moist, spongy type cake. If it's a little denser cake, you don't want to keep it in the fridge too long, because the refrigeration will actually draw some of the moisture from your cake out of it. Freezing will preserve cakes, but refrigeration will definitely dry out a denser cake. So if you're going to be icing your cake, ice it a little sooner, or at least crumb coat it close to when you're going to be able to ice it. Don't leave it there for too long. So we've got a little bit of excess on the top. We're just going to finish smoothing that around, and you just want to run your knife nice and tight along the sides, and just make sure that you haven't left any kind of real excess pieces of icing around the cake, because then when you try to do a final coat, those little bits of icing are going to be firm from having been in the refrigerator, so then you're going to have not a nice smooth texture when you're all done. So we're just going to get that all nice and firmed up. There we go, and it's going to be really hard for me to not want to lick my fingers right now, but I'll behave and wipe myself on the cloth. So I'm just going to pop this into the refrigerator, and then in a few minutes we're going to show you how to ice a cake. Now that my cake has set in the refrigerator for between 5 and 10 minutes, just till the icing firms up a little bit, we're all set to go. Now, it is relatively cool in my shop today, so while I was waiting, I did have to give it a little more whip with some butter. That's normal, that's to be expected. It's more important that we're at the right consistency than to try to force it around your cake. So we've got just a beautiful, creamy, whippy texture. It's really easy to move your knife or your spatula through. So again, we're just going to get a nice, big, generous dollop and put that on the top of the cake, because we're going to be working with all of that. So, because you want to have your cake and eat it too, right? So, and it's all about having the right proportion of cake to icing with every bite. So again, we're just going to push it along and evenly disperse it throughout the entire cake. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do just a good classic icing on a cake. One is just a nice smooth frosting, very similar to how we did our crumb coat, and you're just keeping it nice and tight to the sides of the cake, and you're just running, your knife is almost just hitting the edge of the plate while you're icing it. So it's almost your guideline really while you're pushing it around. And you can see what just a nice smooth finished product that gives you. And then when you get to the top of your cake, you're just pushing it so you've got a nice clean look. But myself, I love that look of just swirls of icing all over the cake. It looks like something Grandma would have had waiting for you with a nice tall glass of milk when you came over to visit. So we're going to mess this up a little bit, and we're just going to push the icing around, and there's no real rhyme or reason to it, and I think that's what makes this such a nice, easy, no fuss way to ice a cake, and it can still look just as elegant as it does rustic with your finished product. So you're just pushing it around, taking all that extra icing, pushing it down on the sides. And the nice thing about this is you don't have to worry about piping it or really fussing with icing bags if you don't want to. But we are going to show you a few tips on how to use an icing bag, because I know that's always what gets everybody's curiosity. And there are so many neat tools out there that you can experiment, that you can purchase in the baking supply stores and the craft stores. Now baking's quite the phenomenon, but it's supposed to be inspiring and not intimidating. So we just really want to make sure that with our shows that you're going to be watching, you're just realizing the good old basics, and then you can just experiment from there. So you can see how easily this icing is just pushing around the sides of the cake, and it really doesn't take a whole lot of icing. This was just a single batch, and there's going to be a little bit left over when we're done, which is nice, just perfect for little fingers coming in and licking the bowl, or perhaps even some big fingers if you've got some kids at heart with a sweet tooth in your household. So I didn't have any particular pattern while I was doing this, and you don't have to. Some people like to go along when they're done and do more of a specific pattern if you're a little more A-type personality, but you don't have to. So if you have some icing left over and you want to do some piping techniques, when you go to the baking supply store, you kind of purchase in rolls or even individually the piping bags. You can get them so that they're called disposable, which is plastic like this, but I actually rewash them. They're good for probably 5 or 10 uses each. You just want to really make sure you soap them up and wash them and dry them properly in between, or you can buy ones that are more of a fabric, but these ones are like 35 to 55 cents each, and there's no loss if you end up throwing it out when you're done. And then this is my favorite tip. It's a little star tip. You can make rosettes with this. You can do a nice classic piping. It's just the most multi-purpose tip. So all we do is, because we just kind of want to think, okay, how big do I want this slit at the end cut, because this bag doesn't have an opening. So we're just going to cut a little bit off the end there. And then to fill your piping bag, because it seems just ginormous, but you actually need all of this bag for your bit of control. So you're going to flip it almost inside out. You're going to fold it over. You're going to put your tip down in, just push it through. These bags are really tough. They take a licking and keep on ticking, let me tell you. So you want it so that it's just barely coming up through. You don't want to have it too close down to the edge of the bottom of the tip, or else what happens is when you're squeezing the bag, the tip will start to force its way through, and then you're in a big mess because you're halfway through piping your cake and your tip has come out, and then you've got to start all over again. So we're going to just fill a little bit of icing in here. I'm going to show you how to make a little rosette on top. So you just scoop it and you scrape it in there, and then you don't want any air in there, so you're going to push your icing down as far as you can, and then you're going to squeeze it. And most of the pressure comes from these fingers at the top of the bag, and they're the ones that are going to squeeze the icing out, and the other hand is really your directional. So let's just do a really nice rosette on the top of the cake just to finish it off. And you just squeeze, and you just go around in a really nice little circle like that, and simple little rosette, you're all done. If you wanted to pipe the bottom of your cake, if you had an actual flat cake, you're just going to squeeze, you're going to go in a line, you're going to pull back, You know, you can just experiment, but this tip is just, it's lovely because you can do so many different icing techniques, and you, again, don't have to have a zillion different tips, and you don't have to have a kitchen full of gadgets, you know, while you're experimenting. I'm going to continue just piping around the bottom of the cake so you can see what a finished product looks like, and just what ease it is. And I'm just, again, I'm just pushing the icing from the top of the bag and controlling it with my bottom hand. And when the icing is a nice consistency, it just comes out so nicely. You'll, trust me, you'll know if your icing is seizing up a little bit and needs some re-whipping. Definitely the lights from the cameras are helping my consistency here, which is nice. There we go. So how's that? Doesn't that look yummy? I think there's going to be some people that are going to be enjoying this with me later today. And of course, you could always put some little sprinkles or dragées, little sugar pearls on here to make it beautiful. But just some nice tall birthday candles would just be so elegant for anybody's birthday. Remember to always use quality ingredients. Start with butter when you're making your frosting. It's just going to elevate the flavors. Always use a good quality vanilla. And don't forget to always make every day a sweet occasion.